The hall of the Marquis of Hanyang is dead silent when a servant comes sprinting in, completely out of breath, screaming that the Wei family is sending a formal marriage proposal for Lady Su Yan, the Marquis's only daughter. Now normally nobody in this house would care about some random proposal, but the Wei family isn't random. They're the single biggest military power backing the Southern Alliance, and if they get rejected, they pull their support, and the whole region goes up in flames. So this isn't a marriage proposal. This is a declaration that can start a war depending on how it's handled. While the entire household is mid-panic, the side door creaks open, and in walks the guy everyone in the city has nicknamed Brick, because apparently that's how smart they think he is. His real name is Liu Heng, but nobody's called him that in years. He's known across town for exactly two things: being breathtakingly handsome and being breathtakingly empty-headed. The kind of guy who flirts with literally every woman who walks past him and somehow still can't read a restaurant menu. Liu Heng struts in like he owns the place, completely unaware that he's interrupting a national crisis, and announces that he heard there's a job opening and he'd like to apply. The Marquis is 2 seconds from having him thrown out when his wife stops him, reminding him that the boy is harmless, just a little simple, and tossing him out would be more trouble than it's worth. So the Marquis, drowning in bigger problems, waves a hand and tells a servant to give him some menial errand job just to get him out of the room. But before that can even happen, another servant bursts in with worse news. The Wei family's envoy isn't arriving next week like they thought. He's already at the city gates. The timeline just got cut from days to hours. The Marquis's wife wants to refuse the proposal outright, but the Marquis knows refusing means insulting the Wei family on a level they won't forgive, and that means losing their troops right when the kingdom needs them most. That's when Su Yan, who's been standing quietly the entire time, says the only thing that makes sense to her. She'll disfigure her own face. Nobody will want a bride with scars, and the Wei family will have no choice but to look elsewhere without it being an insult. She actually picks up a blade to do it right then and there, and her father has to physically wrestle it out of her hand. Even ruined, he tells her, the Wei family wants this alliance for the land and the army that comes with her, not her face. Scarring herself solves nothing. There's only one way out, and they all know it without saying it out loud. She has to already be married. The Marquis hates the idea of rushing his daughter into a marriage just to dodge a political disaster, but Su Yan kneels and begs him, telling him the kingdom's stability matters more than her own comfort. After a long, heavy pause, he finally agrees and orders a public announcement. A one-day open contest. Winner gets to marry his daughter immediately, before the Wei envoy even reaches the gate. Word goes out that only the most accomplished men of the city should bother attending. But of course, the dumbest, most shameless flirt in the entire province hears about a marriage contest and thinks, yeah, that's me, sign me up. Liu Heng walks straight up to the Marquis and announces, completely serious, that he intends to marry Lady Su Yan. The Marquis is about to have him dragged out by his collar when his wife grabs his arm and reminds him gently that the boy isn't right in the head. There's no need to be cruel about it. The Marquis settles down mostly. That's when Su Yan, watching this unfold, suddenly says yes. Let him enter, because to her in this exact moment an idiot is perfect. Someone harmless, someone who won't ask questions, someone who'll never realize what kind of marriage this actually is. She's not picking a husband, she's picking a shield. She quickly clarifies to her stunned parents that she's only allowing him into the contest, not guaranteeing him anything. Her father exhales in relief and even, somewhat begrudgingly, tells the servants to make sure the boy is cleaned up and presentable for the event. Nobody in that room has the faintest idea that the so-called fool standing in front of them is about as far from foolish as a human being can possibly get. Because here's the thing they don't know. That face, the one everybody mocks, the one that earned him the nickname Brick because apparently that's the only thing as thick as his skull, used to belong to a completely different person on the inside. 3 years ago, in a country that doesn't exist in this world, there was a brilliant young pharmacological engineer named Chen Mu. Before some lab accident melted half his face into something he never recovered from, Chen Mu was considered one of the sharpest minds of his generation, fluent in both modern chemistry and emergency trauma medicine, the kind of guy who got headhunted by 3 different research institutes before he turned 30. After the accident, the world stopped looking at him the same way. People flinched. Recruiters stopped calling. He kept working anyway, quietly, mostly alone, eventually ending up doing disaster relief medicine in conflict zones because nobody there cared what his face looked like, only whether he could stop the bleeding. He was treating wounded civilians in a war zone when an explosion ripped through the field hospital. His last conscious thought, staring up at the sky as everything went white, was something almost embarrassingly simple. If there's another life after this, please just let me be good looking. Opens his eyes. He's someone else, younger, lying in an unfamiliar bed in an unfamiliar room that smells like dried herbs and old wood smoke. He sits up, catches his reflection in a bronze mirror on the wall, and just stares. He is, by every metric available to him, devastatingly handsome. He actually laughs out loud, a real unfiltered laugh, the first one in years that didn't feel forced. and then the memories hit him, not his own, but the ones belonging to the body he's now wearing. This body belonged to a young man also named Liu Heng, the laughingstock of 3 counties. 10 years in a tutoring hall, and the kid couldn't read more than a handful of characters. Couldn't win a fight against a chicken, as the local saying went. But the real disaster came 2 years back when this idiot saw a wealthy merchant's daughter once, fell instantly and embarrassingly in love, and when she got sick, volunteered himself as a lucky charm husband because some local superstition claimed marrying a fool could change a sick woman's fortune. Her household humiliated him constantly. Servants laughed at him to his face. But the daughter recovered, and out of some twisted sense of obligation, her family actually let the marriage happen on paper only. It was a marriage in name alone. They never even spoke like a real couple, and the original Liu Heng, despite all of it, was apparently thrilled just to live in the same house and see her face every day. Then about 2 weeks ago, he caught a sudden illness nobody could explain or cure. That's exactly when Chen Mu's consciousness slid into the body and took over. So now our new tenant is sitting in a strange bed, processing the fact that he's young again, gorgeous again, and somehow already married into money, when he hears voices right outside the door. He creeps over and listens, and what he hears makes his blood run cold in the funniest possible way. 2 maids are standing there debating out loud whether he should have died already, openly hoping he finally kicked the bucket so the household could be rid of the embarrassment. He yanks the door open. The maids look up, see him standing there alive and well, and absolutely lose their minds. Screaming, running, one of them trips over her own robe in the panic. He stands there in the doorway, mildly offended, wondering if these two had actually been planning to come check on a corpse. Before he can spiral too far into that thought, something catches his attention. There's a faint shimmer at the edge of his vision, like a screen flickering somewhere just behind his eyes. He blinks, and there it is. A floating readout, visible only to him, like a heads-up display straight out of military tech. He realizes immediately what happened. Back during the explosion that killed him, he'd been wearing a prototype diagnostic visor his research team had been field testing. Something designed to scan injuries and chemical compositions in real time. Apparently, whatever cosmic mechanism dragged his soul across worlds dragged the visor's functions along with it, fused directly into his new eyes. He looks at the bronze mirror. A readout appears: bronze alloy copper tin ratio, decorative tarnish pattern consistent with local craftsmanship standards. He looks at the wooden bed frame. Another readout: cedar, moderate humidity damage, structural integrity at 71%. He's basically walking around with built-in X-ray vision and a full materials lab in his skull, and it auto-labels everything he looks at. That's when the door opens again and a young woman walks in, clearly checking on him. The system immediately tags her vitals before he can stop it. Mild anemia, elevated heart rate, structurally sound. And somewhere buried under the clinical data, a much less clinical flag pops up about her measurements that he absolutely did not ask for and that, frankly, his system has no business volunteering. He clears his throat hard and tries to focus on her face instead. This is Su Langson, his wife on paper, daughter of the wealthy Su merchant family. She looks at him with this mixture of relief and confusion, telling him she heard he'd woken up and rushed straight over. She seems concerned, genuinely so, calling for a physician immediately. The physician arrives, examines him with increasing confusion, and finally announces that the patient is in perfect health. Langson's expression shifts so fast it's almost comedic, going from relief to outright suspicion in under 2 seconds. "How is that possible?" she asks the physician, before catching herself and immediately backpedaling into fake tears, putting on a whole performance about how worried she's been. But our boy isn't the same fool who fell in love with a kind smile 2 years ago. With his diagnostic system quietly running underneath everything, he can read the tension in her shoulders, the inconsistency in her breathing, the way her eyes keep flicking toward the door like she's waiting for someone. He plays along anyway, acting confused and grateful, because tipping his hand this early would be pointless. While she's dropping these heavy hints, clearly trying to get him to take some kind of cue and leave on his own, he just keeps smiling like an idiot and pretending he doesn't understand a word of it. She's getting visibly frustrated, wondering internally why this fool isn't picking up what she's putting down. That's when the door slams open. A man strides in like he owns the room, doesn't even glance at our boy, walks straight up to Langson and kisses her, right there, in front of everyone. Then he turns, finally acknowledging our boy exists, and announces flatly that Langson is his fiancée now and that our boy should get out. So there it is. He got cheated on before he even got a chance to enjoy being married. Turns out Langson only needed a disposable Lucky Charm husband to survive her illness, and now that she's recovered, she's got a real fiancé lined up, some merchant family ally named Bao Heking, and our boy is the inconvenient leftover. Bao Heking sits down next to him with this condescending smile and tells him he's a nice enough guy, they just don't fit. Our boy realizes there's no point fighting it and simply says he'll go. But Bao Heking wasn't finished being a jerk about it. He tells him to be out of the house within the hour or else. Once they leave him alone, our boy hops out of bed completely unbothered, already mentally moving on. New face like this, he figures finding another wealthy woman should be easy work. Man's already drafting his next financial recovery plan in his head when he overhears Bao Heking and Langson in the next room discussing inviting someone named Su Yan from the Marquis household. His ears perk up immediately. Su Yan, daughter of a Marquis. That's a massive upgrade from a mere merchant family. His brain starts spinning new plans before he's even out the door. Meanwhile, back at the Su family, the household head Langson's father is telling a servant to deal with our boy properly. Langson actually asks for a one-day grace period, worried about her reputation if he's tossed out too aggressively. Her father shoots that down, saying they need Bao Heking happy more than they need optics. So our boy is walking home that night, completely unaware of how dark things are about to get, when several large men jump him out of nowhere and tell him to come quietly. He knows fighting is pointless against this many bodies, so he lets them take him. What he doesn't expect is just how far this particular crew is willing to go. These men are planning to bury him alive. The man running this crew is a notorious underworld figure named Han Bao, a guy with more bodies behind him than anyone wants to count, controlling roughly 100 miles of territory through fear alone. Our boy activates his diagnostic vision out of habit, scanning the situation, and immediately notices something strange. There's a thin metal sliver lodged inside Han Bao's body, embedded near his collarbone, slowly working its way toward something vital. Han Bao catches him staring and snaps at him, asking what exactly he thinks he's looking at. Our boy, completely calm given the circumstances, tells him flatly that there's a needle buried in his body and it's going to kill him eventually. The whole crew exchanges glances. Even Han Bao looks genuinely rattled, because apparently not even his own wife knows about that old injury. Our boy adds that he can remove it. Han Bao asks what he wants in exchange. Our boy lays it out simply: spare his life and tell him who ordered the hit. Han Bao laughs in his face and says no. Our boy is confused. Did this guy put the needle there himself on purpose? Then Han Bao drops the actual reason. Nobody hired anyone to kill our boy specifically. Turns out his older brother had borrowed a small sum of money from Han Bao's organization, and with the kind of predatory interest these loan sharks run, a modest debt had ballooned into something the family could never hope to repay. Since they can't pay, our boy is the collateral. We flash back briefly. 2 months earlier, right after the marriage to Langson, our boy's actual father had shown up at the Su residence trying to drag his son home, furious about the marriage. The Su family's guards beat the old man and threw him out into the street. The original Liu Hang was so blindly obsessed with Langson that he'd basically abandoned his own family for her. Back to the present, our boy hears Han Bao casually mention that beyond burying him, they're also planning to kill his parents, just to tie off loose ends cleanly. Just as the blade comes down toward his throat, our boy shouts out that he'll repay 10 times the original debt in full within 3 days. The blade freezes an inch from his neck. The bandits all exchange glances, then look to Han Bao. After a long pause, Han Bao orders his men to let go and gives our boy exactly 3 days. Our boy realizes immediately that someone gave Han Bao a deadline too, which means somebody powerful wants him gone fast, but he agrees to the terms anyway. Han Bao calls for paper to draft a formal debt agreement. Our boy waves it off, says they don't need that, tears a strip of cloth from his own sleeve, pricks his finger, and writes the agreement himself in blood, calm as anything. Han Bao watches this happen and can't help wondering if this is really the same so-called fool the entire province makes fun of. After a final warning, Han Bao sends 2 men to escort our boy home, partly to make sure he doesn't run, partly because even Han Bao is a little curious now about what kind of person he just dealt with. On the walk home, our boy is doing rapid mental math, trying to figure out how anyone raises that kind of money in 3 days starting from absolutely nothing. When he finally reaches his actual family home, the scene hits different immediately. His father is lying in bed, gravely injured from that earlier beating, but still trying to get up, insisting he needs to go to the Su residence and bring his son home because he's convinced they're mistreating him. His mother is just as worried. His younger brother has a badly broken leg and is still determined to limp his way over there to help. Our boy hears all of this through the door and just opens it, drops straight to his knees, and bows deeply. His family is overjoyed to see him standing there, alive and unharmed. He apologizes to each of them individually, starting with his mother, who immediately pulls him into a hug, saying everything's fine now that he's home. But they notice something different about him almost instantly. His eyes are sharper, more focused, less like the boy who left. His brother guesses out loud that the Su family must have finally kicked him out, and their mother actually takes this as good news, since now she can arrange a real marriage for him, maybe with the widow who runs the noodle stall 2 streets over. Our boy internally begs every god he can think of for that not to happen, but laughs it off and redirects the conversation to his father's condition. Using his diagnostic vision, he checks his father over properly for the first time and gets a full readout. Several fractured ribs, internal bleeding pooling in the lung cavity, infection risk climbing fast. Thanks to literal decades of trauma medicine experience baked into his memory from his previous life, he immediately knows the treatment sequence needed. Drain the fluid first, stabilize the ribs, manage the infection before it spreads. He checks his brother's leg next. The fracture is relatively clean, manageable. But his brother, ever the schemer, floats the idea that maybe they could pretend the injury was worse than it is and squeeze some compensation money out of someone. Our boy just stares at him, completely done, flicks him lightly on the injured leg as punishment, and tells him to drop the crooked thinking because he can actually fix it properly. The next day, our boy spends the entire afternoon out gathering medicinal herbs from the surrounding hills, cross-referencing every plant his system can identify against what he remembers from his old pharmacology training. When he returns, he sets up a crude but functional surgical space and operates on his father using nothing but improvised tools and absolute precision. The procedure works. His mother is staring at him afterward like she's looking at a miracle worker, already mentally fast-forwarding to him marrying the village chief's daughter as some kind of reward. Our boy, having actually seen the chief's daughter before, is immediately terrified by this suggestion and suddenly needs urgent fresh air outside. But the second he steps outside and the moment of warmth fades, reality slaps him across the face. 2 days left. If he doesn't pull together that money, his entire family is dead. So much for relaxing. He heads back inside and his mother insists on washing his feet for him like she used to when he was small. He tries to refuse, but the look on her face stops him cold and he lets her do it. The next morning, there's a knock at the door. It's the 2 bandits sent to escort him into the city and keep him moving on schedule. His mother, oblivious to the real danger, comes out to offer them food before they leave, completely unaware she's feeding the men assigned to potentially execute her son if he fails. As they're about to head out, she grabs his hand and presses a boiled egg into it, telling him to eat it if he gets hungry on the road. He looks at that egg and feels something twist in his chest, knowing there were only 2 eggs left in the entire house, and both his parents are still recovering, and she gave hers to him anyway. He gives her his best reassuring smile and tells her he's fine, then leaves with the 2 escorts. On the road into the city, our boy's mind is working through every possible angle. He knows raw force won't get him this kind of money in this kind of time. What he needs is something rare, something nobody else in this era has, and something he happens to know intimately from his old life: industrial-grade dye-chemistry. They arrive at the busiest commercial street in the capital, and stop outside a large building with a sign reading the Jade Loom Pavilion, one of the region's most prominent silk and textile houses. This, our boy decides, is exactly where his plan begins, because the Jade Loom Pavilion happens to be a direct competitor of the very same merchant family that wronged him. He has the doorman summon the owner, promising a business deal that could bring in thousands of additional gold pieces a year. The staff almost laughs him out of the building until one of his bandit escorts introduces himself as being from Han Bao's organization, and suddenly everyone's attitude flips instantly. They're shown straight to the private receiving hall. Inside, they meet the pavilion's owner, a sharp, calculating man named Master Lin. Our boy doesn't bother with small talk. He offers to sell a secret dye formula for 2,000 gold coins flat. Master Lin nearly laughs him out of the building at that price, until our boy pulls a small folded piece of golden fabric from his sleeve and sets it on the table. Master Lin's whole posture changes. Gold thread silk like this is a material reserved almost exclusively for royalty, and the only domestic producer of anything close to this quality has always been the Su family, the same family that just threw our boy out into the street. But the color sitting on this table is richer, deeper, more luminous than anything the Su workshops have ever managed to produce. Master Lin asks how he can trust this is even real. Our boy tells him to provide raw materials and give him 2 hours, and he'll produce something even better right there on the spot. 2 hours later, our boy walks out of the back workshop holding a length of fabric that practically glows. He asks if the payment is ready. Master Lin, now fully convinced, hands over the gold and asks for the formula in writing so he can verify it. Our boy walks him through the actual chemistry, openly demonstrating the dyeing process from start to finish right there in front of him. Just as our boy is about to leave with his payment, the door bursts open. It's the head of the Su family, marching in with guards, accusing our boy of stealing their proprietary formula. Our boy turns to Master Lin expecting at least a flicker of guilt, but the man doesn't even blink. Turns out his own son is currently studying at a military academy under the patronage of Bao Heking, Langson's new fiancé, and this whole thing was a coordinated setup from the very beginning. The Su family head starts performing for the gathering crowd, claiming heartbreak and betrayal, asking through fake tears why our boy didn't simply come to them if he needed money instead of stealing. They've already reported the supposed theft to the local authorities, who arrive moments later to sort out the dispute. Our boy, completely unbothered, laughs at the accusation and points out that his dye is objectively superior to anything the Su family has ever produced, daring them to provide actual proof of theft. They have none. So the Su family head resorts to insults instead, calling our boy a worthless nobody with no education and no skill, asking how someone like that could possibly invent anything. Our boy turns to the officials and proposes the obvious solution, a direct competition. Whoever produces the superior dye wins the dispute outright. The officials, eager for some entertainment, agree on the spot. Langson, who's tagged along with her father, sneers at our boy, reminding everyone that he's a documented fool with no real skills, openly mocking the idea he could out-dye an established family business. Our boy doubles down anyway, announcing he can produce not just a better gold dye, but a perfect purple one as well. In this era, purple dye is notoriously difficult, traditionally extracted from rare shellfish in quantities that make it nearly as valuable as the gold dye itself, and most dye houses just fake it with crude red and blue mixing instead. The Su family head, sensing a trap but unable to back down in front of the crowd now, accepts the challenge, adding a condition of his own. If our boy wins, the Su family head has to publicly apologize. The presiding official agrees to the terms and sets a deadline of 3 hours. Our boy gets to work immediately, telling the officials to bring in plenty of additional witnesses because he wants this win to be undeniable. 3 hours later, the Su family unveils their purple silk first, and the crowd genuinely is impressed. It's a real, legitimate achievement for this era. Then comes the part where they present their own gold formula records as supposed proof that the formula has existed in their family for years, predating our boy's arrival entirely. The crowd starts murmuring that this confirms the theft after all, and the officials look ready to make an arrest. That's when our boy steps forward with his own silk. The color stuns the entire courtyard into silence. Where the Su family's purple is a respectable, slightly muddy shade, our boy's silk practically vibrates with color, pure and luminous in a way nobody in this era has ever seen before. He calmly asks if this, too, was supposedly stolen from their formula records. The Su family scrambles for a response and comes up empty. Then, because he genuinely cannot resist the dramatic flourish, our boy pulls out one more piece of fabric, a length of silk shifting through 5 distinct colors depending on the angle of the light, something that shouldn't be chemically possible by this era's standards. The presiding official rushes over to examine it personally, completely floored. With that, our boy formally asks for judgment. The Su family head, with no leg left to stand on, drops the accusation entirely and storms out. Langson, swallowing her fury, offers our boy a stiff, humiliated apology before following her father out, clearly trying to figure out how the village idiot suddenly became some kind of master dye chemist overnight. Once they're gone, our boy turns to the presiding official and casually asks how things have been going lately, specifically inquiring about a young noblewoman from the Marquis household named Su Yan. Turns out our boy's confidence walking into this whole confrontation wasn't purely about the chemistry. He'd picked up earlier that this particular official has long-standing tension with Bao Heking, which made the timing of going up against a Bao-backed family considerably safer than it looked. This kicks off a flashback to 3 years earlier. The original Lu Heng had been sitting by a lake doing nothing in particular when a hunting party came thundering through, chasing down an enormous wild boar that had wandered off course. The boar charged straight at the original Lu Heng, and just as it was about to flatten him completely, a young noblewoman leapt off her horse and intercepted it, killing the animal in a few clean strikes and saving his life in the process. That noblewoman was Su Yan. Afterwards, she'd had her household send people to check on him during his recovery and had even visited in person a few times. At the time, a young nobleman named Bao Heking, who secretly admired Su Yan, had taken an interest in tutoring the injured fool personally, hoping it would somehow win him favor in her eyes by association. The plan never worked, since Su Yan never came back to visit again after the first few times, and Bao Heking eventually stopped the lessons entirely, even threatening the original Lu Heng not to mention the tutoring sessions to anyone. Our boy realizes now exactly why the rivalry between himself and Bao Heking runs deeper than just a stolen fiancé. Back in the present, the presiding official is visibly irritated at our boy for casually dropping Su Yan's name in conversation, clearly protective of her, and looks ready to scold him before deciding it's not worth the trouble and walking off instead. Our boy mentally files this away. He's about to become this man's romantic rival eventually, but that's a problem for a different day. Right now, he's got the Su family to worry about, since they'll certainly hate him even more than before after today's humiliation. Leaving the pavilion, he runs into Langson one more time. She tries the emotional angle again, apologizing and crying, clearly hoping to extract the rainbow silk formula out of him through guilt. He's not falling for the same trick twice and brushes past her without a word. That's when she drops a different kind of pressure entirely, reminding him that he still owes Han Bao's organization 1,000 gold coins, and the deadline is closing in fast. Our boy is briefly rattled, wondering how she even knows about that debt. As she walks off, one of his bandit escorts mutters that he really should have just taken her deal, since there's barely any time left on the original 3-day clock. Our boy realizes the situation is more dangerous than just paying off one debt. Even if he clears it, the Su family will likely keep using threats against his family to extract that formula out of him eventually. He needs something more permanent, a real solution, not a temporary patch. Just then the sound of galloping horses echoes down the street behind him. Our boy turns to see a cavalry column riding through, led by none other than Su Yan herself. Seeing her gives him an idea on the spot, and he decides to fold a new piece into his existing plan. As her horse passes close by, he deliberately lets himself stumble directly into its path, faking an accident, banking on the fact that she once stopped to help him after a collision years earlier. It works exactly as he hoped. Su Yan immediately dismounts, checks that he's breathing, and can't help noticing, even in the middle of an emergency, just how strikingly handsome this stranger is. Relieved he isn't seriously hurt, she orders her men to take him back to the Marquis estate for proper treatment. Our boy is feeling pretty pleased with himself as he's loaded into a carriage bound for a manor 20 kilometers outside the city. On the ride over, he marvels at how different the Marquis' territory looks compared to the city proper, complete with its own fortified manor grounds. Even the Su family, wealthy as they are, would look almost modest sitting next to this. Inside the estate's main hall, Su Yan, now dressed casually, meets with her parents to report on her recent military exercises. Her father, the Marquis, listens with quiet pride but can't hide his deeper worry about the family's overall position, since her younger brother shows little aptitude for either combat or scholarship, and the kingdom has been steadily stripping noble households of their military authority over the past several years. Su Yan tells him not to worry, that she has no intention of marrying out and abandoning the family, and that she's prepared to remain unmarried for life if that's what it takes to keep their house standing and support her brother. The Marquis sighs, quietly admitting his son simply isn't ready for that kind of responsibility yet. The servant interrupts to announce that the stranger she brought back is requesting an audience specifically regarding her own marriage prospects. The Marquis, baffled, asks who exactly this person even is. The servant explains he's just someone she picked up off the street after an accident. Curious despite himself, the Marquis allows him in. Our boy walks in and gets straight to the point with zero preamble. The Wei family is preparing a marriage alliance proposal targeting the Marquis estate, and the man behind it, Wei Tong, intends to make his move imminently. Both Su Yan and the Marquis are visibly shaken to hear this. The Wei family sits among the most powerful noble houses in the entire kingdom, tied by marriage to the ruling family itself and holding governorship over the southern province. The Marquis demands to know how a random stranger could possibly have access to information this sensitive. Our boy explains simply that he used to be tangled up with the Su merchant family and overheard Langson and Bao Heking discussing the matter openly in front of him, treating him like furniture rather than a person who could understand and remember what they said. The Marquis turns to his attendant demanding to know exactly who this man is. The attendant explains that he's the disgraced former son-in-law of the Su family, supposedly cast out for theft and inappropriate conduct toward a household maid. The Marquis' temper flares immediately, ready to throw the man out on principle alone, but he holds himself back since there's a far bigger crisis to deal with. Still skeptical given the Su family's smear campaign, he orders an investigation to confirm the claims independently. Even with his reservations about our boy's character, he recognizes the gravity of the warning and promises a reward for the intelligence regardless of how it pans out. What our boy actually wants more than anything is to ask for Su Yan's hand on the spot, but he restrains himself and decides to play the long game instead. He requests permission to stay and work at the estate. His real motivation isn't employment, it's proximity. He wants to be close enough to Su Yan to eventually win her over properly. The Marquis agrees, somewhat distractedly, and tells him he'll study alongside his son for the time being. Just then, another servant rushes in, panicked, reporting that Wei Tong has already arrived in the region overnight and is heading toward the estate that very moment. Both our boy and the Marquis start panicking simultaneously, our boy specifically horrified at the thought of this rival showing up and locking down Su Yan before he's even had a chance to make his case properly. The Marquis confirms the report is legitimate, and that the Wei family's plan is deliberately fast, designed to catch them off guard before they can organize a refusal. The Marquis' wife asks if they can simply decline the proposal outright. Her husband tells her flatly that offending the Wei family isn't an option they can afford, given the troops they bring to the table during a time of rising regional tension. Su Yan, weighing her options, briefly considers disfiguring herself to remove herself from consideration entirely. The Marquis snatches the blade out of her hand before she can act, telling her that family comes before legacy, and that scarring her face won't even solve the actual problem, since the Wei family's interest is really in the estate's elite cavalry forces, not her appearance specifically. The only viable path forward is arranging an immediate marriage for her to someone else, fast enough to make the Wei proposal moot. Despite his own reluctance to sacrifice his daughter's future happiness this way, Su Yan kneels and insists that securing the family's stability matters more than her personal feelings on the matter. After a long, heavy silence, the Marquis agrees and announces a formal suitor selection. 5 candidates, all from respectable backgrounds, invited to compete for her hand within the day. Our boy, who has already privately decided Su Yan belongs to him, has absolutely no intention of letting some random approved candidate take that spot. He declares his intention to join the competition. This sends the Marquis into a fresh wave of fury, since from his perspective, a disgraced outsider just announced he intends to marry his daughter with zero standing to back it up. He's about to have him removed entirely when his wife steps in, reminding him gently that the whole town already considers this man harmless and a little simple, so there's no real harm in just letting it pass. The Marquis calms down and orders a servant to escort our boy out with some token gold coins as a dismissal. As they're walking him toward the door, Su Yan herself walks over, visibly curious about him now. She addresses both him and his bandit escort warmly as the 2 fools, apparently a nickname they've already earned around the estate that morning. Her view of our boy settles somewhere between amusement and a strange, protective fondness, like watching a child who doesn't quite understand the danger he's walking into. She decides to let him join the competition after all. The Marquis finds the whole thing ridiculous, but lets it go, confident his daughter would never actually choose him over the other 4 legitimate candidates. Our boy, meanwhile, is brimming with quiet confidence, already plotting exactly how he's going to outshine every single one of them. 2 hours later, all 5 candidates, our boy included, are seated in separate rooms while Su Yan conducts her own private interview process, intending to make her choice by midday and be married by evening. First up is Lord Wei Lion of Swan Lake Territory, who practically vibrates with excitement at the thought of winning. When she asks him what he could offer the estate's future, he launches into an extended speech about passing the imperial examinations, becoming a celebrated scholar, and how the combination of his intellect and her battlefield reputation would elevate the family to unprecedented heights. Su Yan listens politely, hands him a metaphorical participation trophy, and moves on. The next 3 candidates offer some variation of the same generic ambition speech, nothing that makes her pause or reconsider. Finally, she steps into our boy's room and asks him the same question. His mind immediately races through every impressive thing he could theoretically offer her: his medical knowledge, his diagnostic abilities, his secret intelligence on her family's threats. But then he catches himself and realizes none of that is actually what she needs to hear right now. So instead, he looks her directly in the eye and tells her she can have complete freedom in their marriage. As long as she doesn't betray that trust outright, she can live exactly as she wants with no interference from him. The moment the word betray leaves his mouth, her face goes faintly red, and she turns to leave the room rather abruptly, probably cursing him internally for bringing up infidelity in their very first real conversation. But here's the thing our boy already understood before she even walked in. He correctly identified what she actually values most: autonomy and a husband who won't try to control or interfere with her life. He just handed it to her directly, no embellishment needed. Back in the main hall, Su Yan announces to her parents that she's made her decision. Her father, practically bouncing on his heels with anticipation, asks if it's Wei Lion or one of the other respectable candidates. After a long, deliberate pause, she tells him she's chosen Lu Heng. The Marquis's reaction is immediate and explosive. He demands to know why on earth she'd picked the village fool over 4 genuinely accomplished men. Su Yan calmly explains her reasoning. She's worried that marrying someone ambitious and power-hungry could eventually put her brother's position at risk if that husband decided to seize control of the estate after their father is gone. With our boy, that risk simply doesn't exist. Plus, given his already terrible reputation, no outside family would have any motive to target the estate through marriage politics, since there's nothing to gain by attacking someone with nothing. And she adds with a faint smile, all she really wanted out of this arrangement was a handsome husband, and he's got that part covered at least. Her parents understand the logic but are still heartbroken, fully aware of how poorly Lu Heng's reputation reflects on the family. Su Yan bows deeply, begging them to honor her choice, even framing his bad reputation as protective camouflage. Nobody will bother targeting a family connected to someone this disreputable. It's a genuinely solid argument, but her parents still aren't fully convinced. The Marquis, feeling like the worst father alive for letting his daughter settle for this out of necessity born from his own son's shortcomings, asks where his son currently is. When told the boy is in his study, the Marquis calls for a discipline whip, and his wife has to physically chase after him to stop the beating from getting out of hand, both of them clearly channeling their frustration about the situation onto the one family member they feel actually failed them. After a round of what the household euphemistically calls discipline, the news reaches our boy that he's officially been chosen. His entire demeanor shifts the instant he hears it. This is the moment everything changes. He's about to become the son-in-law of one of the most prominent households in the region, which means real protection against the Su family and everyone else who's wronged him. He's already mentally drafting his revenge arc when something far more urgent clicks into place. He urgently tells the estate's steward to send people to secure his actual family immediately, because they're in serious danger. The steward, recognizing this man is about to become the young master's son-in-law, agrees without hesitation and tells him not to worry, to rest instead, since the wedding will happen that very evening. Meanwhile, back at Han Bao's territory, the underworld boss has already ordered men to grab our boy's family as collateral, planning to kill them the moment our boy hands over the dye formula he's apparently been hiding. Both the legitimate nobility and the criminal underworld of the region are now scrambling in completely opposite directions because of this one man. Some preparing to celebrate his marriage, others actively plotting to murder his entire bloodline. When Han Bao's men arrive at the family home expecting easy targets, they instead find our boy's family armed, prepared, and entirely unwilling to go down without a fight. The lead enforcer is actually a little impressed by the resistance and draws his weapon, ready to make things interesting, when he suddenly feels a presence behind him. He spins around to find a tall, composed man standing there, and somehow this stranger's mere presence is enough to make even this hardened criminal's spine turn cold. This is the Marquis's personal steward, sent specifically to escort the family to safety. The enforcer tries to play it cool, claiming they're simply collecting an unpaid debt and asks to be allowed to finish the job. The steward responds with deadly calm that his orders are to bring this family back unharmed and politely asks them to step aside. When the enforcer presses for the name of whoever is giving these orders, the steward simply says he serves the Marquis household. The enforcer's blood runs cold. He hadn't connected the dots until that exact moment, that the man being targeted by the very household sending its own private steward must be the same fool who's currently caught between the Su family and the underworld. Regardless of the details, the moment a household this powerful gets directly involved, the enforcer knows there's no possible way to continue. He has no choice but to let the family go. The steward calls in additional guards and personally escorts the family to a waiting carriage, treating them with a level of respect normally reserved for visiting nobility. The enforcer watches this whole scene unfold, increasingly baffled by just how seriously this household is taking what should have been a minor street-level shakedown. Once the family is gone, he nearly collapses on the spot from the sheer stress of it. His own men ask why he let them go, worried Han Bao will be furious when he finds out. The enforcer just stares at them and asks if they have any idea who that steward actually serves, before explaining exactly which household just intervened. The moment they hear it, every single one of them goes pale. The enforcer rushes back to report directly to Han Bao at his headquarters. At this exact moment, Han Bao is in the middle of some private leisure time and is decidedly unhappy about the interruption, snapping that this had better be a life or death matter or the messenger himself will become one. The enforcer relays everything. Our boy's family rescued by the Marquis household's personal steward. Han Bao's expression turns dark immediately. He kicks out the company he was entertaining and starts running through exactly how badly this could blow back on his organization. Sitting there stewing, he hears separately that the Marquis household is currently running a suitor selection competition for their daughter. A thought lands in his head, one so absurd he barely believes it himself. There's no way that fool could actually end up married into that household. Right, but just to be absolutely certain, Han Bao decides they need eyes on the ground to confirm one way or another. Not long after, in a private chamber within the Su family compound, Han Bao, the Su family head, and a few other interested parties gather to discuss the same impossible question. Could our boy possibly have actually become the Marquis estate's chosen son-in-law? They all agree it seems unlikely, but to be thorough, they decide to send representatives to the wedding ceremony itself just to verify. Then we cut to the Marquis estate, decorated for celebration. Servants running in every direction, fireworks crackling overhead. Among the gathered guests, sure enough, are representatives from both the Su family and Han Bao's organization, all desperate to confirm who exactly is marrying into this household. At that moment, our boy is sitting inside a bridal carriage while firecrackers explode outside, masked according to local custom until the ceremony's reveal. The carriage gets carried to the entrance. The Marquis and his wife step out to formally announce the groom's arrival. The carriage is set down, the curtain lifted, and the groom steps out. The instant this masked figure appears, the entire Su delegation and Han Bao's representatives go completely still. Langson's eyes widen in disbelief, silently screaming internally that there's no possible way this is happening. Our boy ignores every single one of them entirely, fully focused on not letting these people ruin his own wedding. With that, the ceremony proceeds. The formal bows to heaven and earth, the bow to the gathered hall, the bow between bride and groom. Standard ceremonial procedure. Just as they're about to retreat to the bridal chamber and put this whole spectacle behind them, an obnoxious laugh rings out across the courtyard. It's Liu Wan, the current lord of the city, theatrically reminding everyone that while it's technically against tradition to unmask before the bridal chamber, he's simply too curious about who the Marquis ultimately chose. Could they possibly remove the mask just this once? Before anyone can address that particular headache, another booming laugh cuts through the crowd, and a tall, commanding figure strides in slowly. The instant people register who he is, the entire venue, including the Marquis family themselves, drops into a respectful bow. This is Lord Xuan of the southern provinces, the famed general credited with pacifying an entire rebellious region years earlier. He, too, expresses idle curiosity about the masked groom and casually suggests removing it. With someone of Lord Xuan standing backing the request, the crowd loses its remaining hesitation and starts urging our boy to reveal himself as well. Our boy glances toward Su Yan, who gives him a small nod of permission. He lifts the mask. The entire courtyard goes silent in collective shock. Not one person in that crowd had imagined, even in their wildest expectations, that the face under that mask would belong to the city's infamous fool. Han Bao, standing somewhere in the back of the crowd, feels a genuine chill run through his entire body, as the reality of his situation multiplies roughly 1,000-fold in an instant. But the two most visibly shocked people in attendance are Lang Xin and Bao Heking. Bao Heking, apparently incapable of processing this with any dignity, starts laughing like an absolute maniac and openly asks Su Yan whether this entire wedding is some kind of elaborate joke. She calmly asks him why he'd think that. That's when Bao Heking decides to really commit to humiliating himself, launching into a tirade about how this man is a documented fool who couldn't read a single character after 10 years of schooling, and was recently expelled from the Su household for theft and inappropriate behavior toward a maid. How, he demands, could someone like that possibly be considered worthy of marrying into this household? Su Yan simply asks if he has any actual proof backing up his claims of low intelligence, or whether this is simply jealousy talking. Another guest steps forward, claiming he personally studied alongside our boy years ago and can testify to his documented foolishness. Our boy recognizes him immediately. A scholar named Yan Cheng, someone he once trusted, now conveniently available to betray him the moment it's politically useful. Our boy calmly asks if he has any actual proof. Yan Cheng, smug and certain of himself, declares that failing to read a single character after a full decade of education is all the proof anyone could possibly need, and offers to write a few characters on the spot for our boy to read aloud as a test. Our boy accepts without hesitation. Yan Cheng grabs paper and brush and writes out a handful of deliberately obscure, easily misread characters, the kind designed to trip up anyone without genuinely deep classical education. When Su Yan glances at the page, even she can't immediately place them, and the rest of the crowd is equally lost. Yan Cheng stands there radiating smug confidence, telling our boy that if he can't read them correctly, he has to publicly admit to being functionally illiterate right there at his own wedding. Our boy glances at the page and starts reading them off, one after another, completely unbothered, explaining pronunciations, historical origins, and contextual meanings, with the casual ease of a man flipping through a familiar textbook. Yan Cheng's confident expression crumbles in real time as our boy demonstrates a depth of knowledge that goes well beyond what Yan Cheng himself actually understands about his own test characters. Our boy shakes his head, feigning disappointment, and points out that it's a little embarrassing to test someone using material you don't fully understand yourself. He then suggests, given the obvious fairness of the situation, that Yan Cheng should read a few characters of his own choosing in return. Yan Cheng, sweating but unable to back down now without losing even more face, agrees. Our boy writes out a short string of characters that look perfectly ordinary individually, but combine into something almost nobody would recognize at a glance. He tells Yan Cheng he only needs to read 4 of them aloud. Yan Cheng spots a few familiar-looking pieces and confidently blurts out a phrase that, when properly understood, translates roughly to "I am a fool." The crowd loses it completely. Even Su Yan has to cover her mouth to keep from laughing outright. Yan Cheng's old teacher, mortified by the spectacle, quickly hustles his student out of the courtyard before things can get any worse for the man's reputation. Wanting to save face after his student's disaster, the old teacher decides to challenge our boy himself, writing out a single, deeply obscure character on a fresh sheet of paper. Su Yan and the surrounding crowd gather around to examine it, but nobody recognizes it, not even our boy's most educated onlookers. He recognizes it instantly, though, because this particular character happens to be well documented in his old life's historical linguistics archives, even if it's fallen almost entirely out of use here. Yan Cheng, apparently incapable of learning his lesson, starts running his mouth again from the sidelines. Our boy ignores him entirely, since some people simply aren't worth acknowledging. He knows the modern reading of the character clearly, but he's also aware the pronunciation in this era's classical tradition might differ substantially, and that the old teacher likely knows the meaning without being entirely certain of the historical pronunciation himself. Sensing an opening, our boy proposes a wager. If he gets it right, Yan Cheng has to slap himself. If he's wrong, our boy will take the hit instead. Yan Cheng, hungry for any chance at redemption, agrees immediately. Our boy announces the pronunciation, then calmly explains the character likely carries a meaning along the lines of to pierce or to stab. The old teacher's expression shifts instantly. He's clearly wondering how this supposed fool could possibly know something even seasoned scholars haven't definitively confirmed. For a moment, he considers simply calling our boy a liar, but he can't, because there are others in the crowd who happen to know the meaning is correct, and denying it now would only make the old teacher look foolish himself. Grudgingly, he confirms our boy was right. Yan Cheng, completely deflated, looks to his teacher for some kind of rescue, but the old man simply looks away, unwilling to dig himself any deeper. Bound by his own wager, Yan Cheng bitterly slaps himself in front of the entire assembled crowd. Our boy watches the whole thing with quiet satisfaction. Before storming off, Yan Cheng mutters something about getting revenge eventually. Our boy's knowledge has now thoroughly impressed everyone present, including Su Yan, who's looking at him with a newly recalibrated sense of respect mixed with genuine curiosity. The Marquis, for the first time, shows actual satisfaction directed at our boy and tells him it's time to formally introduce Su Yan to his parents. Just then, Lord Chuan calls out for our boy to wait. As he turns, Lord Chuan points at him and says with an unreadable half-smile that he finds him quite interesting and intends to remember him. Our boy, playing perfectly humble, bows and thanks him for the high regard. Lord Chuan laughs at the response, though everyone present can tell the laugh isn't entirely friendly. Meanwhile, our boy's actual parents, having arrived earlier and feeling deeply out of place among all this wealth, chose to stay quietly in the back hall rather than attend the main ceremony, not wanting to embarrass their son. They're even hesitant to wear the formal robes the estate sent over, worried they might damage something so expensive. When our boy finally reaches the back hall, he immediately drops to his knees and formally greets them as their son paying respects. Su Yan, without a moment's hesitation, kneels right alongside him and introduces herself as their new daughter-in-law paying respects as well. Our boy is genuinely surprised by this. He'd half expected her to maintain some distance given the obvious class difference, but she shows nothing but sincere respect toward his parents. He finds himself thinking she's beautiful in more ways than just the obvious one. His mother quickly helps Su Yan to her feet, and after a formal toast, Su Yan excuses herself to leave him alone with his parents for a while. After a quiet, heartfelt dinner, his parents, not wanting to overstay their welcome in such an unfamiliar setting, head home in their own carriage. Then we move to the bridal chamber. Su Yan walks in, visibly nervous, her face faintly flushed. Seeing her like this, our boy can't help but stare for a moment. She's too shy to meet his eyes directly and settles onto the edge of the bed instead. The two of them sit there in awkward silence, neither entirely sure who's supposed to make the first move. Our boy is debating internally whether to take the initiative when Su Yan speaks first, telling him she needs to say something important. She explains that she was effectively forced into this marriage by political circumstances surrounding the Wei family, and while she had no real choice in the timing, she already considers herself genuinely married, with no intention of ever remarrying regardless of what happens between them. As for producing an heir, she tells him plainly she isn't prepared to do that right now. Our boy actually understands this completely. Expecting to consummate a marriage on the very first night, especially with someone of Su Yan's standing and circumstances, would be unrealistic regardless of how this all started. He signals his understanding and respect for her position without complaint. It's roughly 2 months later that we catch up with the household's day-to-day rhythm, by which point our boy has already become something of an institution within the estate. We pick the story back up on the morning he's finally summoned by the Marquis for his next assignment, formal schooling, since the household's resident tutor system has over 100 students from various noble households, and the Marquis insists he attend now that there's been time to settle into married life. Our boy initially protests that he's already well learned, but his father-in-law is still quietly stewing about an earlier incident involving our boy and a local gambling den, so he decides going through the motions of formal education might keep him out of trouble for a while. The household school sits on the estate grounds, and the moment our boy walks in, every other student is shooting him death glares. The reason is obvious enough. He married Su Yan, the woman half the young nobles in the region had been quietly hoping to win over themselves. A handful of them surround him, clearly ready to start something physical, but the Marquis' own son steps in, putting an arm around our boy and announcing loudly that this is his brother-in-law, so they'd better show some respect or deal with him directly. The group backs off, though the resentment in their eyes doesn't fully fade. Class begins, and the old master running the literature curriculum decides to test our boy on a classical text right out of the gate. Our boy recites it flawlessly, explains the deeper meanings with ease, and even offers interpretations that exceed what the old master himself had originally understood about the passage. The teacher's mind is quietly blown. Internally, he's already drafting a report to the Marquis, insisting this young man's talents cannot simply be left buried in obscurity. Everyone else in the room sits there in stunned silence, having assumed our boy was simply a lucky-looking nobody who happened to marry well. The scene shifts to the arithmetic class, taught by an elderly steward named Su Wenhao, who also happens to manage all of the estate's financial records. From the very first glance, Su Wenhao is sizing our boy up with open hostility, which confuses our boy since he's never interacted with this man before. He briefly wonders if it's simple jealousy like everyone else, but quickly dismisses that, given the man's age. The lesson itself turns out to be embarrassingly basic elementary-level material by our boy's old-world standards, so naturally he falls asleep partway through. Su Wenhao notices immediately and starts berating him, threatening corporal punishment as discipline. Our boy points out reasonably that other students were also dozing off, which only confirms his suspicion that he's being deliberately singled out. He wonders briefly whether Su Wenhao is connected to one of the rejected suitor candidates from the original marriage selection. Su Wenhao grabs our boy's wrist to administer punishment anyway, insisting he must be lying about already knowing the material, setting a punishment of 30 strikes plus 3 hours of kneeling as penance. Our boy looks at him coldly and says simply that he respectfully declines. The room goes dead silent. Su Wenhao's face flushes red with fury and he slams his broken teaching ruler down so hard it cracks, storming out to report this insubordination directly to the Marquis. The Marquis's son goes pale at the news, telling our boy that if the Marquis actually hears about this, he's going to get a serious beating. Our boy, completely unconcerned, asks the boy a pointed question instead. Was it Su Wenhao who instigated some kind of trouble against him earlier? The boy shakes his head quickly, insisting he can't say anything, that it would be disloyal, but his face gives him away completely. Our boy presses further, asking if Su Wenhao is connected somehow to one of the original suitor candidates. After a moment, the boy confirms it. Su Wenhao is in fact related by marriage to Wei Lion, one of the rejected candidates from the contest, and had apparently been hoping that connection would eventually pay off through career advancement if Wei Lion had married into the family instead. With our boy now married into the household and that path permanently closed off, Su Wenhao clearly sees him as an obstacle worth resenting. So when Su Wenhao storms back into the main hall demanding punishment, accusing our boy of disrespecting his elders and tarnishing the household's reputation, our boy calmly explains the actual situation to the Marquis. The material being taught was genuinely elementary, he'd already mastered it, and he hadn't lied about anything. Su Wenhao scoffs, insisting someone who barely managed to recognize a handful of characters after years of formal education couldn't possibly have already mastered arithmetic too. He throws down a formal challenge, 10 problems our boy only needs to solve 3 correctly to avoid punishment. If he fails, 30 strikes. Our boy accepts, then casually raises the stakes himself, asking what happens if he solves all 10. Su Wenhao laughs outright at the suggestion, calling it impossible, but agrees that if it somehow happened, he'd publicly apologize. Our boy asks the Marquis to formally witness the wager. Su Wenhao spends the next hour drafting what he believes are nearly unsolvable problems, deliberately obscure and convoluted, intending to make absolutely certain there's no path to victory for our boy. When the questions are finally presented, our boy looks them over and can barely suppress a smile. Given his actual graduate-level mathematical training from his previous life, these questions are roughly equivalent to using a sledgehammer to crack an egg. The first several questions are disguised in flowery classical language but boil down to basic arithmetic and simple equations, nothing remotely challenging. The final question, though, catches his attention properly. It's dressed up as a simple word problem, but it's actually a legitimate, genuinely difficult optimization puzzle, the kind that would have given even trained mathematicians in his previous life some pause. He solves it anyway, arriving at an answer considerably more refined than what most scholars in this era would ever manage to reach. He finishes writing and hands in his paper. Less than 10 minutes have passed when the test was meant to take a full hour. Everyone in the room is staring. The Marquis is quietly worried our boy might just be scribbling nonsense, which would make it impossible to defend him if the answers turn out wrong. Su Wenhao grabs the paper to grade it personally, and the smugness drains from his face with every line he reads. Every single answer checks out, correct from the first question straight through to the 9th. By the time he reaches the final, near-impossible question, his hands are visibly shaking. The answer our boy provided exceeds anything Su Wenhao himself had ever managed to calculate in decades of personal study on that exact type of problem. Refusing to accept defeat gracefully, Su Wenhao tears the paper apart and stomps on the pieces, screaming about how unacceptable the mess looks. But our boy, anticipating exactly this kind of reaction, calmly produces a second copy he made in advance and hands it over for independent review instead. A senior scholar within the estate examines both papers from start to finish, and upon reaching the final question audibly gasps, immediately reporting to the Marquis that the household appears to be harboring a genuine mathematical prodigy, the likes of which he's never personally witnessed. He confirms every single answer is correct and that our boy's understanding clearly exceeds the scope of the test itself. The Marquis asks our boy, somewhat dazed, who exactly taught him all of this. Our boy, with his most casual, slightly smug expression, says he simply taught himself, adding that arithmetic really isn't that complicated once you understand the underlying logic. Even with this resounding victory, the Marquis privately feels like he still wants to discipline him just a little for the attitude. Just as Su Wenhao tries quietly slipping out of the room to avoid the inevitable apology, our boy calls out, reminding him that a wager was made and it's time to honor it. Su Wenhao looks like he might actually combust on the spot, but before he can scramble for an excuse, the Marquis steps in, insisting a teacher must set an example for his students regardless of personal pride. Su Wenhao, with absolutely no room left to maneuver, is forced into a humiliating public apology in front of the entire assembled class, gritting his teeth through every word. The students watching this whole spectacle unfold start looking at our boy like he's some kind of folk hero. But the Marquis isn't done. He turns to our boy with a stern expression and tells him to extend his hand for a token symbolic strike, just to make sure the lesson about arrogance and humility sinks in properly. Our boy reluctantly complies, taking the light correction with as much dignity as he can manage under the circumstances. That same evening, in a secluded part of the city, Su Wenhao slips out under cover of darkness and meets with someone in a private courtyard. He's holding a heavy wooden box, presenting it formally as a gift meant to secure favors for his son's upcoming military examination. But that's not the worst of it. Tucked inside his robe is a second item entirely, a detailed ledger containing sensitive financial records belonging to the Marquis estate. This corrupt steward has apparently been quietly selling out his own household's confidential information for years just to grease the wheels of his son's career. Not long after Su Wenhao slinks home, thinking himself safely in the clear, a familiar figure slips into his private study like a shadow. It's Han Bao himself. He gets straight to the point. Does Su Wenhao want our boy gone permanently? Su Wenhao admits obviously that he does, but points out the Marquis seems genuinely fond of the man now, which makes direct action risky. That's when Han Bao lays out a different strategy entirely. Spread rumors through the city that our boy is secretly ambitious, pretending to be a harmless fool while actually scheming to seize control of the entire estate. Paint him as dangerous rather than foolish. Once enough people believe that narrative, our boy can be dealt with through political and social pressure rather than anything that could be traced back to either of them. It's a genuinely clever plan, dressed in just enough plausibility to actually work. Su Wenhao agrees to cooperate. Meanwhile, our boy has been doing some quiet digging of his own. He approaches the Marquis directly, stating flatly that he suspects Su Wenhao of large-scale embezzlement and requests permission to formally examine his financial records. He points out the obvious red flags. Su Wenhao's official salary is modest, yet his sons walk around dressed in expensive silk, and he personally owns several properties scattered across the city, far beyond what his stated income could ever support. The Marquis is hesitant, not wanting to stir up unnecessary drama within his own household over what might just be minor skimming, the kind of low-level corruption every large estate quietly tolerates. But our boy pushes back, asking what happens if the actual scale of embezzlement turns out to be far worse than anyone currently suspects. The Marquis's wife asks if he has any actual evidence, since accusations without proof are dangerous to throw around carelessly. Our boy produces 2 partial account books already showing clear inconsistencies in Su Wenhao's reported expenses, hinting that there's considerably more where this came from. The Marquis, naturally curious how he obtained private financial documents in the first place, raises an eyebrow. Our boy simply explains with a straight face that he had Su Wenhao's own apprentice retrieve them for him under false pretenses. The Marquis and his wife can't help but cover their faces, imagining exactly how that conversation must have gone. Despite his reservations, the Marquis agrees the matter needs proper investigation, but sets firm conditions. Our boy must conduct the audit alongside the estate's senior scholar rather than acting alone. Any findings must be reported back to the Marquis personally before any action is taken. And since Su Wenhao is currently away from the estate, our boy is to gather evidence quietly first rather than confronting him directly. The Marquis genuinely doesn't want to be the villain here, given Su Wenhao's decades of service. Our boy privately thinks his father-in-law is simply too kind-hearted for his own good, but accepts the conditions anyway, figuring someone has to handle the unpleasant parts. He's led to the estate's records office, and the sheer scale of the task immediately becomes apparent. Towering stacks of ledgers cover every available surface, spanning more than 2 decades of financial history. The senior scholar explains it would normally take a dozen trained accountants several months to properly review everything, and they have only a single night before Su Wenhao returns and potentially destroys or hides further evidence. Most people would consider this an impossible task. But our boy, drawing on genuine modern accounting frameworks buried in his memory alongside his old-world analytical training, asks only for someone to help him quickly sort and organize the most relevant records. What would normally take dozens of people several months gets compressed down dramatically in his head, cross-referencing patterns and inconsistencies at a speed that shouldn't be humanly possible. By the time he finishes his analysis, even he is somewhat stunned by the actual scale of what Su Wenhao has been siphoning away over the years. It's staggering, far beyond simple low-level skimming. Meanwhile, word reaches Su Wenhao that someone is auditing his accounts, and he rushes back to the estate in a full panic, immediately dropping to his knees before the Marquis with tears streaming down his face, asking if his decades of loyal service mean nothing now and threatening dramatically to harm himself to prove his innocence. The Marquis, uncomfortable with the theatrics, orders our boy to halt the investigation for the moment. Su Wenhao, feeling triumphant and completely unaware of just how much our boy has already uncovered, starts pivoting into a different strategy entirely, telling the Marquis's wife that there are troubling rumors circulating in the city about our boy harboring secret ambitions, suggesting his foolish persona has always been an elaborate act designed to win Su Yan's hand and eventually seize control of the household. The Marquis's mood sours considerably hearing this, since he genuinely values our boy at this point despite the trouble he causes, and he prides himself on being able to tell the difference between mischief and genuine malice. Just as Su Wenhao continues building his case against our boy, the man himself walks in. Su Wenhao immediately pivots to direct accusations, but our boy just laughs lightly, walks straight up to him, and quietly mentions that he never expected anyone could embezzle quite this much. Su Wenhao's composure cracks internally, though he tries to keep his expression neutral, asking what exactly that's supposed to mean. Our boy states the figure outright, an amount equivalent to an entire year's worth of military salaries for the estate's defense forces, money that could have meaningfully strengthened their position during a time of rising regional tension. Su Wenhao, scrambling, claims rising prices and standard depreciation account for the discrepancies. Our boy methodically dismantles every excuse, pointing out specific inconsistencies in equipment replacement records, unexplained increases in unrelated supply purchases, and patterns that only make sense if someone has been systematically funneling resources out under the guise of legitimate expenses. Su Wenhao, sweating but refusing to confess outright, loudly insists this is all fabricated slander, demanding solid proof. Our boy calmly produces the full reconstructed ledger he assembled overnight. The Marquis reviews it personally, his expression darkening with every page. He calls in the senior scholar to independently verify the findings, who confirms everything is entirely accurate after a thorough review. Cornered but still unwilling to confess, Su Wenhao throws a final desperate tantrum, accusing our boy of trying to eliminate longtime loyal retainers simply for being different, insisting he'd rather die than admit to fabricated charges. Our boy, completely unbothered by the theatrics, casually mentions he already knows exactly where the actual stolen funds are hidden. Su Wenhao doesn't believe him, but our boy asks the Marquis to send an armed escort along with him to verify. An hour later, the group arrives at a semi-abandoned outpost on the edge of the estate's territory. Su Wenhao sees the location and immediately goes pale, unable to fathom how anyone could possibly know about this place. Just as they're about to enter, an arrow suddenly streaks toward our boy. The Marquis's chief guard steps in front of him just in time, deflecting the shot and urging caution. After a brief search, they capture a single intruder hiding nearby, Su Wenhao's own son, who'd apparently come to monitor the hidden stash personally. Our boy ignores the would-be assassin entirely, instead scanning the surrounding terrain with his diagnostic vision and pointing directly to a spot on the ground, instructing the guards to dig there. 15 minutes later, they uncover a heavily reinforced cellar, locked tight enough that even sword strikes can't force it open. Our boy scans Su Wenhao's appearance and immediately spots something concealed in his hair, the actual key hidden in plain sight the entire time. With one smooth motion, he plucks it free. Su Wenhao practically screams in disbelief, demanding to know how anyone could have possibly figured that out. Inside the cellar, the full scope of the corruption becomes undeniable. Boxes upon boxes of gold, jewelry, fine artwork, and antiques, an entire hidden fortune accumulated through years of quiet theft. Among the loot, our boy finds something even more damning, a personal ledger documenting every instance of embezzlement in meticulous detail, essentially a written confession spanning years. With the evidence now completely irrefutable, the question of what to do with Su Wenhao's son comes up. Given the assassination attempt just moments earlier, our boy coldly states there's no leniency to offer there. The full convoy returns to the estate loaded with the recovered treasure. Sitting in the carriage on the ride back, our boy stares down at his own hands for a long moment, quietly reflecting on how he's now genuinely shed blood in this strange new life of his. Comfort, he realizes, comes with a price, but nobody gets to threaten his family and walk away clean. That's the line he's drawn for himself. Back at the estate, the recovered fortune leaves everyone stunned. An enormous quantity of gold, dozens of fine paintings and calligraphy works, and several boxes of jewelry, representing only a portion of the total embezzlement once everything else is accounted for. Su Wenhao, finally out of options, begs for his life, offering to become our boy's personal servant, anything to survive. Our boy looks at him coldly and simply states that he must die. The senior scholar raises a procedural complication. Under current regional law, the estate technically doesn't have the authority to directly execute a household employee for this kind of offense. The matter would normally need to go through the city's formal magistrate. Our boy refuses to let it slide that easily, pointing out that the recovered seller accounts for only a fraction of the total embezzled amount, with the rest clearly funneled toward bribing officials in exchange for securing his son's career advancement, all of it documented explicitly in the recovered ledger. This isn't just one corrupt steward anymore. This is a documented bribery network reaching well beyond the estate's walls. Marquis, reading through the ledger himself, is consumed with rage at the sheer scale of betrayal after decades of presumed loyal service. Su Wenhao, seeing his situation has become hopeless regardless of outcome, snaps entirely and starts laughing in a kind of manic, unraveling way, revealing his original motive. Years earlier, he'd asked the Marquis to grant his son a meaningful military command position, and the Marquis had refused, recognizing the boy lacked the actual competence to lead effectively. Su Wenhao, rather than accepting that honest assessment, decided loyalty wasn't worth more than his son's advancement and chose corruption instead. This revelation only intensifies the Marquis's fury, and he nearly moves to execute the man personally on the spot before the senior scholar intervenes, warning that acting outside proper legal channels could create serious complications down the line. That's when our boy steps forward with a solution. He quietly asks Su Wenhao if he's afraid of facing judgment under his own extended family's clan law instead, a separate, older legal framework that operates independently of the estate's authority. Moments later, several elders from Su Wenhao's broader extended family arrive, having been summoned in advance. After apologizing formally to the Marquis for the inconvenience, they order Su Wenhao taken away to face judgment according to clan law for an entirely separate, unrelated charge our boy had quietly arranged, one that conveniently carries an unambiguous death sentence without the same jurisdictional restrictions. Su Wenhao, confused and desperate, insists he's only guilty of embezzlement, and that the clan elders have no authority to execute him for that alone. Our boy steps closer and informs him calmly that the charge being used isn't embezzlement at all, but an entirely separate moral offense, one that Su Wenhao can't actually disprove given the circumstances arranged around it. Su Wenhao's expression goes utterly blank with shock. He's dragged away, desperately shouting that he has critical information about someone planning to harm our boy. Our boy responds with a faint smile, telling him that if someone wants to harm him, he already knows exactly who it is. Hours later, Su Wenhao meets a brutal public end in accordance with clan law, witnessed by hundreds. Afterward, recognizing the significant service our boy provided, the Marquis offers him a reward of his choosing. Our boy briefly entertains a far more personal request involving his marriage, but ultimately says aloud that he doesn't want anything at all. The Marquis insists that won't do and decides to put our boy formally in charge of managing the estate's financial accounts going forward. Our boy actually tries to decline that one, requesting instead that he simply be allowed more freedom to visit his own parents whenever he wants. But facing a man who's clearly become a magnet for chaos wherever he goes, the Marquis isn't quite ready to grant him unrestricted freedom just yet, and instead grants him several hundred acres of quality farmland as a consolation reward, walking away before our boy can argue further. With Su Wenhao permanently out of the picture, our boy turns his attention back to settling an older score, Han Bao. The man who tried to bury him alive, who threatened his entire family, and who's clearly still scheming with the Su family behind the scenes. Our boy decides the most effective revenge doesn't need to be violent. It needs to be financial and humiliating and entirely within the bounds of the law, so nobody can accuse him of overstepping his new position. His plan is elegantly simple. Han Bao runs a near monopoly on gambling houses throughout the territory. Our boy intends to walk into every single one of them and simply keep winning, draining Han Bao's finances steadily until his entire operation destabilizes. He arrives at one of Han Bao's flagship gambling halls and is greeted by Han Shu, one of Han Bao's trusted lieutenants, who's confident he can make our boy lose substantially given his reputation as a skilled manipulator of the games. Our boy starts by borrowing a modest sum, converting it into gambling chips, and settling into a simple dice game betting on high or low outcomes. He places everything on a high roll for his first bet and wins decisively, doubling his stake immediately. Han Shu is rattled but assumes it's beginner's luck. Our boy bets everything again on the next roll and wins again, his winnings climbing rapidly. Increasingly alarmed, since even a strong month for the casino rarely brings in more than a modest profit margin, Han Shu steps in to personally control the dice himself, since he happens to be a master of subtle dice manipulation and one of Han Bao's most trusted operators. But our boy, using his diagnostic vision to track every roll with perfect accuracy regardless of manipulation, switches games entirely, suggesting a card game instead, one with even more obvious opportunities for cheating through marked decks. He insists on using a fresh unmarked deck specifically to remove that variable, and once it's confirmed unmarked, the game begins. With his vision tracking every card in play, the outcome becomes a foregone conclusion. Round after round, our boy bets large sums without even glancing at his own hand and wins consistently, drawing a growing crowd who start calling him a master gambler. Han Shu eventually can't continue, having lost an amount equivalent to a substantial portion of his entire operation's monthly revenue, and steps outside in a panic. Meanwhile, back at the Su family compound, Han Bao and the Su family head are celebrating prematurely, confident our boy will eventually drown in gambling debt. Their celebration dies instantly when Han Shu bursts in, visibly shaken, reporting the actual losses, which turn out to be far larger than anyone anticipated. Han Bao, furious and disbelieving, demands an explanation, suspecting cheating, but Han Shu insists it was a completely clean, legitimate loss. Han Bao rushes to the casino himself to assess the damage firsthand, only to find a massive, jubilant crowd celebrating our boy's continued winning streak. Our boy informs him calmly that the total owed has climbed even higher than originally reported, since other gamblers following his lead have also been winning alongside him. The final number nearly gives Han Bao a heart attack, representing a substantial fraction of his entire criminal organization's accumulated wealth, especially given how much overhead he carries supporting hundreds of subordinates. Wanting to avoid losing face publicly, Han Bao invites our boy inside for a private discussion, but the assembled crowd of gamblers refuses to let him leave, suspicious that some shady arrangement might be made behind closed doors that cheats them out of their winnings. Our boy reassures them loudly that everyone will be properly paid, and given his new status as the Marquis's son-in-law, the crowd chooses to trust him. Upstairs, Han Bao's expression turns cold, accusing our boy of using underhanded tactics specifically to bankrupt him as some kind of personal vendetta. Our boy responds with a philosophical observation about reputation. The household's reputation matters greatly, but his own personal reputation, already thoroughly battered by years of public mockery, has very little left to protect. This effectively neutralizes Han Bao's attempt to shame him into backing down. Han Bao then tries a different tactic, declaring he'll simply refuse to pay out anything at all, banking on the idea that our boy can't force the issue without risking his own reputation further. Our boy just laughs and clarifies he never wanted just the winnings. He wants the winnings and Han Bao's complete cooperation going forward, specifically demanding accountability for every threat made against his family. This enrages Han Bao further, who declares he won't hand over a single coin. Han Bao, attempting to regain control of the narrative, walks to the window and announces to the assembled crowd outside that all their winnings will be fully honored, hoping this generous gesture will neutralize our boy's leverage over the situation. The gamblers cheer for Han Bao instead, momentarily flipping the dynamic. Our boy, unbothered, simply points out that Han Bao operates several other gambling establishments throughout the territory, and as long as those remain open, the winning streak simply continues elsewhere, with an ever-growing crowd following him from location to location. True to his word, our boy continues his streak across multiple establishments, and the participating gamblers grow more numerous and more enthusiastic by the hour, since following our boy has become essentially a guaranteed path to profit. Before long, Han Bao's organization has hemorrhaged an amount representing the majority of his daily operational income, with our boy himself betting only token amounts each round, while the bulk of the winnings flow to the crowd of regular gamblers backing him. Recognizing the threat to his bottom line, Han Bao ultimately makes the painful decision to shut down every single one of his gambling establishments for the day rather than continue bleeding money. The closures themselves represent a staggering financial blow, since these locations account for the overwhelming majority of his daily revenue. Hanbao deeply regrets, in this moment, not having dealt with our boy more permanently before things escalated this far. Word of the chaos reaches the regional governor's allied family, the Wei household, the very same family whose marriage proposal kicked off this entire chain of events in the first place. They'd quietly been backing Hanbao's operation in exchange for a cut of his profits, using him as a convenient source of off-the-books funding. With the casinos shut down and Hanbao financially crippled, that arrangement collapses overnight, and the Wei family's local representative, a sharp-tongued young man named Wei Tong, decides he needs to step in personally to salvage what's left. Wei Tong arrives at Hanbao's headquarters and lays out the new reality bluntly. Continuing to back a financially ruined operation isn't worth the embarrassment, and Hanbao has become a liability rather than an asset. He suggests the cleanest solution is simply for Hanbao to disappear from the picture entirely, allowing the Wei family to quietly absorb whatever remains of his territory and operations without any messy public reckoning. Hanbao, sensing the writing on the wall, decides his best play is total honesty in exchange for protection. He sends an urgent message requesting a private meeting with our boy directly, the very man currently dismantling his finances. When they meet, Hanbao, stripped of his usual bravado, admits everything: who hired him originally to threaten our boy's family, the full extent of his arrangement with the Wei family, and the fact that Wei Tong is now actively planning to eliminate him to cover up the entire operation. Our boy listens to all of this with the calm patience of a man who already suspected most of it. He tells Hanbao plainly that he has no particular loyalty to keep him alive, but he's also not interested in seeing an entire criminal organization implode violently in a way that could destabilize the region or get innocent people caught in the crossfire. He proposes a deal. Hanbao formally disbands his most predatory operations, returns a substantial portion of his ill-gotten wealth to the communities he's exploited over the years, and in exchange, our boy will personally vouch for him remaining alive, provided he becomes useful going forward rather than dangerous. Hanbao, recognizing he has no better option left, agrees. Word spreads quickly through the underworld that the infamous Hanbao has essentially been brought to heel by the Marquis's son-in-law, and the surrounding criminal networks quietly reassess just how dangerous this supposed fool actually is. Wei Tong, hearing that his planned cleanup operation has been derailed, is furious, but with Hanbao now operating under the implicit protection of a noble household, moving against him directly risks an entirely different kind of trouble. For now, Wei Tong backs off, filing this entire situation away as a grudge to settle later. Our boy returns to the estate that evening, expecting at minimum a quiet round of scolding from his father-in-law for the public spectacle of the past few days. Instead, he finds the Marquis waiting for him personally, arms crossed, clearly having anticipated his attempted sneaking in. The Marquis demands an explanation for the entire gambling escapade, technically a reckless risk given how publicly visible it all was. Our boy bows in apology, admits his fault readily, and the Marquis, despite his frustration, can't quite bring himself to stay angry once he hears the full reasoning behind the plan. Su Yan, for her part, had spent the entire ordeal in full armor, fully prepared to personally lead estate troops into the city if anything had gone wrong. When our boy finds her like this afterward, he's both surprised and quietly moved by the gesture. He helps her out of the armor, and in that moment, struck by just how genuinely formidable and beautiful she is, lets his hands linger a beat too long. She catches his wrist immediately, asking exactly what he thinks he's doing. He offers a flimsy excuse about her skin being too smooth for his hands to behave properly, which she doesn't buy for a second, but lets slide anyway with a warning not to let it happen again. Weeks pass in relative peace after that, with our boy settling more comfortably into estate life, occasionally sparring lightly with Su Yan, continuing his informal tutoring sessions, and slowly winning over the household staff with his unconventional charm. The peace in this story never lasts particularly long, and the next disruption arrives in the form of a formal letter. The letter comes from the Zhao family, a once prominent noble house that fell from grace generations ago after losing a territorial dispute, but recently reascended in influence by being among the first noble families to voluntarily surrender their private military forces to the crown during recent reforms, earning significant favor with the ruling family in the process. Every other noble house quietly resents them for it, viewing their cooperation as a betrayal of traditional noble independence, but nobody can openly say so given how favorably the crown now views them. The letter is an invitation to an engagement celebration for the Zhao family's daughter, Zhao Wanru, a woman who has spent nearly a decade carefully constructing a public image as the region's most refined and accomplished noblewoman. Our boy, looking over the invitation, recognizes an opportunity. He's been increasingly aware that his own household standing took a real hit through the constant public drama of the past months, while families like the Zhaos seem to glide through scandal-free, propped up by polished reputations and political convenience. He decides it's time to do something about the imbalance, and what he has in mind isn't physical confrontation. It's reputation warfare, conducted through the written word, an arena where his modern world literary instincts give him a genuinely unfair advantage in this era. He recruits the Marquis's son, who goes by the nickname Fatty among the household staff due to his rounder build, as an unwitting collaborator. Fatty happens to have a small private collection of mildly scandalous literature he's embarrassed about, and our boy, recognizing an opportunity, dangles an offer. Help him write and illustrate an anonymous satirical novel, get it popular enough nationwide, and the resulting fame might actually help Fatty's notoriously poor luck with attracting female attention. Fatty, despite correctly suspecting our boy's underlying motives, agrees enthusiastically once the promise of romantic prospects enters the conversation. Together, they produce a sweeping, scandalous melodrama about a socially ambitious merchant's daughter, whose carefully cultivated public reputation hides a host of manipulative, self-serving behaviors, a story that bears an unmistakable resemblance to certain real events our boy has personally witnessed, dressed up just enough to avoid direct legal liability while still being instantly recognizable to anyone paying attention. Our boy personally handles the illustrations, putting considerably more artistic effort into them than strictly necessary. Fatty, reviewing the finished pages, gets visibly flustered but powers through, fully invested in the project at this point. They title the finished manuscript something deliberately melodramatic and sensational, and Fatty, despite his nervousness about getting caught, sneaks off that night to read through it one more time before submission, getting so absorbed in the story that he completely fails to notice his own father walking directly into the room and reading over his shoulder. The Marquis discovers the entire manuscript this way, and our boy spends a tense hour bracing for serious consequences. Instead, when the Marquis finally summons him, he simply asks if our boy wrote it. Our boy confirms it. The Marquis administers a token symbolic punishment, more for form's sake than genuine anger, and then, to our boy's complete surprise, starts praising the manuscript's quality outright, admitting he and his wife stayed up the entire night finishing it themselves. The Marquis isn't actually offended by the scandalous content, viewing it as simply a literary device, but he does push back on the obvious personal vendetta woven through the story, suggesting the work could stand entirely on its own literary merits without needing the targeted jabs at a specific real family. Our boy refuses to remove that element, arguing that the entire purpose collapses without it. He explains his deeper reasoning to the Marquis. There's also a secondary strategic benefit tied to an ongoing territorial dispute the estate has with a rival noble house, something the publicity around this book could indirectly help leverage in their favor. The Marquis, connecting the dots himself, is genuinely stunned by the layers of planning behind what initially looked like simple petty revenge. After some negotiation, the Marquis insists on one change only: alter the protagonist's name in the text, leaving everything else intact. Our boy privately calculates that readers will still easily identify who the story is actually about regardless of the name change, but agrees to the modification anyway since it costs him nothing. The following morning, our boy and Fatty travel together to a nearby cultural capital city famous for its concentration of publishing houses and literary tradition, the kind of place where a book genuinely needs to succeed if it's going to make any real impact nationwide. This city also happens to be the ancestral seat of the Zhao family itself, the very family our boy is preparing to publicly humiliate. At the city's most prestigious bookstore, our boy encounters Zhao Wenhua, the Zhao family's second son and a moderately successful author of wildly popular but critically shallow romance literature, currently riding high on both his literary fame and his ongoing pursuit of Jiang Chunhua, the most celebrated young noblewoman in the entire region. Zhao Wenhua, denied the chance to inherit his family's title as a younger son, built his own path to social relevance through writing and networking, and as our boy quickly observes, he's essentially the male mirror image of Zhao Wanru, another sibling who clawed their way to social prominence through carefully managed image rather than substance. Our boy can't help laughing out loud at the title of Zhao Wenhua's latest best-selling work, finding it almost painfully shallow. Unfortunately, Zhao Wenhua happens to be standing right there and overhears it. The two size each other up instantly, and the dislike is immediate and entirely mutual. Zhao Wenhua, sensing an opportunity to score points with his social circle, launches into an extended insult, calling our boy and Fatty disgraces to their respective noble families, and dismissing our boy specifically as nothing more than a pretty face living off his wife's reputation. Our boy, completely unfazed, simply agrees with the assessment, deadpan, which throws Zhao Wenhua off balance momentarily. Then our boy hands his own manuscript to the bookstore's owner, asking for an honest professional opinion. The owner, not wanting to offend the Zhao family by giving the manuscript serious consideration, initially intends only to skim it politely before declining. Instead, he finds himself completely absorbed, recognizing genuine literary sophistication well beyond what he expected from two obvious outsiders. He ultimately declines to publish it anyway, though, after Zhao Wenhua quietly threatens to pull his own much more commercially successful series from the store's shelves if they proceed. Caught between an undeniably impressive manuscript and an existing profitable business relationship, the owner makes the safe business decision and apologizes, suggesting our boy try elsewhere. Our boy takes the rejection in stride. Fatty, less composed, nearly starts a physical altercation with the shop owner before our boy pulls him back, already mentally moving on to the next step of his actual plan. Zhao Wenhua's influence, it turns out, extends further than anticipated, and every major bookstore in the city ends up similarly unwilling to touch the manuscript. Undeterred, our boy eventually finds a small, run-down shop on a side street owned by a man named Deng Yan, someone whose literary tastes run deep and genuine rather than commercially calculated. Deng Yan reads through the opening pages and becomes completely absorbed, declaring the work borderline extraordinary, particularly praising the illustration work. When asked if he's worried about backlash from Zhao Wenhua's considerable influence, Deng Yan simply asks, with the calm confidence of a man who's built an entirely separate business empire, whether someone who deals in less reputable but extremely profitable literature genuinely has anything to fear from social boycotts. It turns out Deng Yan runs an enormous underground distribution network spanning dozens of cities, dwarfing even the most prestigious official bookstores in actual sales volume, even if his usual catalog leans considerably less prestigious than literary fiction. Deng Yan agrees to print and distribute an ambitious initial run, and our boy makes one additional strategic request: time the release to coincide exactly with the launch of Zhao Wenhua's next big book, ensuring a direct, public head-to-head comparison. Deng Yan is nervous about the numbers given how reliably profitable Zhao Wenhua's existing fanbase is, but our boy insists on going big regardless, structuring a deal where he personally covers any shortfall if sales underperform, but takes a significant cut of profits if they exceed expectations. He also adds one more touch to the manuscript before printing: a minor side character whose entire backstory and mannerisms are unmistakably modeled on Zhao Wenhua himself, practically guaranteeing the man will eventually recognize himself in the pages and have an extremely difficult time proving it was intentional without drawing even more attention to the resemblance. Launch day arrives, and both books hit the streets simultaneously. Zhao Wenhua's devoted fanbase floods the bookstores as expected, completely confident in another easy victory. He stands amid the celebration fully convinced of his own untouchable social standing, openly dismissive of the idea that ordinary commoners could possibly threaten his literary dominance. Then, somewhere in the crowd, someone notices an enormous, strikingly designed promotional display for our boy's book, completely unlike anything this era's publishing world has produced before, and the crowd's attention starts drifting that direction almost magnetically. By the end of the day, every single copy of our boy's manuscript has sold out completely, a number that dwarfs even Zhao Wenhua's typically strong opening sales, an outcome that genuinely shocks everyone involved in the local publishing scene. Zhao Wenhua, initially celebrating his own modest success, soon learns the actual comparative numbers and his confidence shatters entirely. He demands a copy of our boy's book immediately, fully intending to tear it apart critically in front of witnesses. 2 hours later, he hasn't moved from his seat, completely absorbed despite himself. When he finally snaps back to reality and notices people watching him read so intently, he throws the book down dismissively, loudly declaring it worthless out of obvious wounded pride. But then the illustrations catch his attention properly, and his expression shifts. The side character, clearly modeled after him, stares back from the page, every detail uncomfortably specific and recognizable. Enraged, Zhao Wenhua rallies a mob of scholarly associates and marches straight to the city magistrate's office, demanding the book be banned, the printer arrested, and every copy burned. He frames it as a matter of protecting public morality and respecting established literary tradition. The magistrate, who happens to be quietly enjoying his own personal copy of the book at that exact moment, finds the demand somewhat hypocritical, but agrees to hear the formal complaint anyway, mostly out of professional obligation. Zhao Wenyu delivers an impassioned speech about moral corruption and disrespect toward the literary establishment. The magistrate, unmoved, simply asks where exactly the supposedly offensive content violates any actual law or tradition. Cornered, Zhao Wenyu eventually has to admit the real grievance. The book personally targets and humiliates him. The magistrate points out that plenty of people share similar names and traits, and there's no way to definitively prove the content refers to him specifically without him publicly confirming the resemblance himself, which would only draw more attention to the embarrassing comparison. Storming out, humiliated and unsatisfied, Zhao Wenyu decides to take matters into his own hands. He gathers a paid mob of roughly 200 people and marches them to Deng Yan's shop, demanding every copy be surrendered for public burning, framing it as righteous moral cleansing. Deng Yan, watching this unfold, internally recognizes the deep hypocrisy at play, since a significant portion of the very mob demanding the burning had purchased and presumably enjoyed copies just that morning. Deng Yan tries reasoning with the crowd, explaining he's already sold out completely and there's nothing left to confiscate. The mob doesn't believe him and threatens to destroy his shop regardless. Deng Yan warns them they're about to bring serious trouble down on themselves, but Zhao Wenhua, watching from the back of the crowd, dismisses the warning entirely, confident he's untouchable in his own family's home territory. The mob storms in, finds bundled stacks of paper wrapped for protection, and drags them outside to burn without checking too closely what's actually inside the wrapping. Zhao Wenyu watches the flames with smug satisfaction, internally congratulating himself on erasing our boy's success in a single decisive move. What he doesn't know, and what Deng Yan is frantically trying to explain before it's too late, is that those particular bundles aren't copies of the novel at all. They're official government policy documents recently issued by the regional governor's office. Ones Deng Yan had been storing temporarily as a favor to a government contact, completely unrelated to the dispute at hand. The moment this becomes clear, the mob's enthusiasm evaporates instantly, replaced by genuine terror, since publicly burning official government documents carries an entirely different category of legal consequence than burning a piece of mildly scandalous literature. Zhao Wenhua and several of his closest associates immediately drop to their knees, the reality of what they've just done finally sinking in. Our boy, who'd been quietly observing from the edge of the crowd the entire time, steps forward and asks, with theatrical innocence, whether burning the governor's official documents counts as an act of open defiance against regional authority. Zhao Wenyu had paid for a mob, orchestrated a public demonstration, and personally supervised the destruction of government property, and now finds himself thoroughly, inescapably cooked by his own scheme. Our boy, savoring the moment, calmly recites the standard legal penalties for this exact offense: stripped titles, corporal punishment, and exile to a remote frontier posting. The assembled scholars, whose entire social identity revolves around maintaining their hard-earned titles and respectability, go pale collectively at the prospect. Our boy, sensing an opportunity for leniency in exchange for cooperation, offers the crowd a deal: identify who actually organized this entire demonstration and walk away without consequence. Nearly every single person immediately turns and points directly at Zhao Wenhua. The city's actual lord arrives moments later, drawn by the commotion, and our boy wastes no time laying out exactly what happened, backed by an overwhelming chorus of witness testimony. Zhao Wenhua, completely cornered, eventually has to accept his father will need to be summoned to address the situation personally. When Zhao Lanting, the family patriarch, arrives and learns the full extent of his son's self-inflicted disaster, he's mortified, recognizing immediately how badly this threatens the family's carefully cultivated reputation with the crown. Our boy, seeing an opening, proposes a resolution. The matter quietly disappears in exchange for two conditions. First, Zhao Wenyu personally and publicly burns every remaining copy of his own popular, but shallow novel as a symbolic act of humility. Second, the elder Zhao formally and sincerely apologizes on his son's behalf for the entire campaign of harassment against our boy's work. Zhao Lanting, recognizing the political minefield his son just planted directly under the family's reputation, agrees immediately, administering a brief but thorough scolding to his son right there in public before complying with both conditions. The resulting public spectacle generates even more attention for our boy's novel than the original launch did, with word of the dramatic confrontation spreading even faster than the book itself. Within days, sales figures shatter every regional record anyone can remember, the entire chaotic mess having functioned as the most effective marketing campaign imaginable, completely free of charge. While all of this publishing chaos was unfolding, a far more serious threat had been quietly gathering strength back home. The Marquis's old political rival, a calculating regional commander named General Cao Heng, had been working behind the scenes for months, slowly assembling support from other noble houses for a coordinated move against the Marquis estate. His son, Cao Jin, had been dispatched to personally court alliances with the Wei family, the Zhao family, and several smaller noble houses, framing the Marquis as an outdated relic clinging to old military privileges the crown was actively trying to phase out. General Cao's strategy was patient and methodical, built around three sequential moves. First, isolate the Marquis politically, by convincing every other regional noble house to side with the new crown-favored reforms rather than risk being associated with old guard resistance. Second, cut off the estate's financial lifeline by calling in old debts and challenging the estate's claim over a contested territorial asset known as Jinshan Island, a resource-rich piece of land both the Marquis's family and a rival northern house had been disputing for over a century. Third, once the estate was sufficiently isolated and financially crippled, move in for a final political takeover with the crown's tacit approval, framing it as restoring order rather than naked aggression. Our boy, upon returning from his publishing victory and catching wind of just how seriously this threat was developing, sat down with the Marquis to map out exactly what they were facing. He'd already pieced together most of General Cao's strategy simply from observing the pattern of recent events. The sudden reluctance of other noble houses to engage warmly with the estate, the increasingly aggressive debt collection notices arriving from the estate's primary creditor, the ancient and influential Yinyuan banking house, and the rising chatter about the Jinshan Island dispute resurfacing after years of dormancy. The Marquis, listening to our boy lay out the entire conspiracy point by point, found himself increasingly amazed at how thoroughly this son-in-law had assembled a complete picture from what seemed like scattered, disconnected pieces of information. Our boy held up two fingers, indicating there were still two specific weaknesses in the plan that hadn't yet been exploited, and once those cracks were properly widened, the entire scheme would collapse. The first weakness centered on the Yinyuan banking house itself. While they were technically the estate's primary creditor, their relationship with the family went back generations, and our boy suspected their public posture of demanding repayment was largely performative, done to maintain appearances with the crown rather than reflecting any genuine desire to see the estate collapse. Banking houses, after all, profit far more from long-term reliable debtors than from forcing bankruptcy and recovering only a fraction of what's owed. The second weakness was the Jinshan Island dispute itself. Our boy had learned, through some careful digging facilitated by Han Bao's now cooperative information network, that the ancient royal decree governing the dispute required a formal periodic competition between the two rival claimant families, one that hadn't been properly invoked in over 20 years due to administrative neglect rather than any actual resolution. If they could force a legitimate, properly documented competition, rather than letting General Cao quietly redistribute the territory through political pressure, the matter would have to go through formal channels the crown couldn't easily manipulate without drawing unwanted scrutiny. The Marquis, intrigued but cautious, asked how exactly they were supposed to force a competition nobody seemed to want to officially acknowledge existed anymore. Our boy explained that he'd already begun planting the groundwork during his trip to publish the novel, having quietly mentioned the dormant dispute to several scholars and minor officials who had no particular stake in the outcome, but who loved nothing more than uncovering forgotten legal technicalities that made powerful families squirm. Once enough idle gossip about the overlooked decree started circulating among bureaucratic circles, someone with genuine administrative authority would eventually feel compelled to investigate, if only to avoid the embarrassment of having overlooked an active legal obligation. Sure enough, within a matter of weeks, a formal envoy arrived from the regional governor's office specifically to address the long-dormant Jinshan Island question, much to General Cao's visible irritation, since this was precisely the kind of independent oversight he'd been hoping to avoid. The envoy, a sharp, no-nonsense official named Yan Wuji, announced that the governor wanted the matter resolved properly and suggested, almost dismissively, splitting the island evenly between the two competing families as a quick political fix. Our boy, sitting through the negotiations, immediately recognized the problem with this proposed compromise. The northern half of the island contained the overwhelming majority of valuable mineral resources, while the southern half was mostly salt marsh and unremarkable coastline. A 50-50 geographic split sounded fair on paper but represented a massive practical loss for whichever family ended up with the southern portion. The Marquis, recognizing the unfairness immediately, kept his composure in front of the envoy but was clearly furious internally. That's when commotion erupted outside the meeting hall. A messenger arrived breathlessly reporting a large crowd gathering at the estate's gates, demanding justice over some unrelated matter our boy had quietly anticipated might surface eventually. It turned out to be the fallout from an earlier incident, a minor personal dispute our boy had with a corrupt local family weeks earlier that had been simmering in the background, suddenly resurfacing at the worst possible moment thanks to some opportunistic stirring by General Cao's people, hoping to embarrass the estate publicly in front of the visiting envoy. Our boy stepped outside to address the crowd directly, quickly identifying the situation as a calculated distraction designed to make the household look chaotic and poorly managed in front of important visitors. With characteristic confidence, he resolved the underlying grievance on the spot through a combination of genuine fairness and a fair bit of theatrical showmanship, turning what was meant to be an embarrassing public spectacle into another demonstration of the estate's responsiveness and competence. The visiting envoy, watching this unfold from a distance, couldn't help but be quietly impressed despite having no particular stake in the outcome. With the immediate crisis diffused, and the envoy's confidence in the household's stability subtly reinforced rather than undermined, attention turned back to the territorial dispute. Our boy proposed an alternative to the governor's lazy 50-50 split, properly invoking the original century-old decree's actual competition format, a combination of martial skill and scholarly merit, exactly as originally specified, rather than settling the matter through political convenience. He argued persuasively that ignoring the legitimate historical process simply to save administrative effort set a troubling precedent that any noble house could exploit going forward whenever convenient. Yan Wuji, recognizing the logical and legal soundness of the argument, and perhaps secretly relieved to avoid being blamed personally for an unfair compromise, agreed to formally reinstate the original competition format, with both families given several weeks to prepare their respective representatives. This development put General Cao in a genuinely difficult position. His original strategy depended entirely on quiet political maneuvering and gradual isolation, not on an open, formal, legally sanctioned competition where the Marquis estate's two strongest assets, Su Yan's exceptional martial skill and our boy's unconventional brilliance, would be directly showcased in front of official witnesses. General Cao's own household, while militarily competent, had nobody capable of matching either of those two specifically. Sensing the shifting momentum, General Cao pivoted his strategy. Rather than risk a humiliating defeat in the formal competition, he focused his remaining political capital on accelerating the second prong of his original plan, financial pressure through the Union banking house, hoping to force the estate into such dire financial straits that they'd be unable to properly prepare for the competition at all, regardless of how favorable the rules now looked on paper. Representatives from the Union banking house did indeed show up at the estate not long after, formally requesting accelerated repayment terms on the estate's outstanding debts. Our boy, having anticipated this exact move, advised the Marquis beforehand to remain polite but non-committal during the meeting, neither confirming nor denying any change in repayment capability, and to simply let the visit conclude without any binding commitments. After the banking representatives left, seemingly unsatisfied but without any concrete leverage gained, our boy explained his reasoning to a confused Marquis. The banking house's public posture of aggressive debt collection was almost certainly performative pressure applied by General Cao's political influence rather than a genuine independent decision by the bank itself. Banks, after all, profit considerably more from a long-term stable debtor making consistent payments than from forcing a messy, reputation-damaging collapse that might only recover a fraction of the owed amount, and would also signal to other potential borrowers that the bank couldn't be trusted to maintain reasonable, stable terms. Sure enough, within days, a quieter, more discreet representative from the same banking house arrived separately, this time without any of General Cao's people present, privately reassuring the Marquis that the institution had no actual interest in destabilizing a centuries-old reliable client relationship, and that the earlier aggressive posture had been, in essence, theater performed under external political pressure they couldn't openly refuse. This second, genuine conversation effectively neutralized General Cao's financial strategy entirely. With both prongs of General Cao's plan now significantly weakened, our boy turned his attention to directly addressing the underlying political isolation strategy. He suggested to the Marquis that rather than passively waiting for other noble houses to be picked off one by one through General Cao's persuasion campaign, they should proactively demonstrate the estate's continued strength and reliability as an ally, specifically by hosting their own gathering, inviting precisely the noble house's General Cao had been targeting, and using the occasion to subtly showcase exactly how capable and well-positioned the estate actually remained. The Marquis, having learned by this point to trust our boy's instincts even when the specific reasoning wasn't immediately obvious, agreed to host the gathering. Word went out, and despite some hesitation from a few houses already half convinced by General Cao's narrative, curiosity about the estate's recent string of dramatic public victories, the corruption scandal, the gambling triumph over Han Bao, the publishing phenomenon humiliating the Zhao family, proved too tempting to resist. Nearly every invited house ultimately accepted. The gathering itself became something of a showcase event. Su Yan demonstrated her martial prowess in a friendly but unmistakably impressive sparring exhibition against several visiting noble guards, decisively outperforming every challenger. Our boy, for his part, engaged several visiting scholars in casual conversation that subtly revealed the sheer breadth of his knowledge across medicine, mathematics, and classical literature, carefully calibrated to impress without appearing to show off excessively. By the end of the gathering, the prevailing sentiment among the visiting noble houses had shifted considerably, from viewing the Marquis estate as a declining old guard relic to recognizing it as a household quietly accumulating genuine multifaceted strength. General Cao, receiving reports of how thoroughly his isolation campaign had been undermined by a single well-executed social gathering, recognized that his broader strategy had effectively collapsed. His son, Cao Jin, frustrated and embarrassed after months of careful diplomatic groundwork unraveling so quickly, pushed his father to consider more drastic, direct measures, even hinting at the possibility of forcing a confrontation through fabricated accusations or staged incidents. General Cao, more pragmatic and less recklessly emotional than his son, recognized that any move against the estate now, especially one based on fabricated pretenses, risked exposing his entire scheme publicly, particularly given how closely the regional governor's office, through Yan Wuji, had recently been paying attention to matters involving the estate. Acting rashly now could transform a quiet political maneuver into a serious, career-ending scandal for his own family instead. Weeks later, the formal competition for Jinshan Island finally arrived. The northern rival family sent a moderately skilled martial representative and a competent but unremarkable scholar. Su Yan dispatched the martial challenge decisively within minutes, never seriously threatened throughout the entire match. For the scholarly component, our boy stepped forward personally, working through a series of classical knowledge tests, practical administrative problems, and a final open debate on regional governance philosophy, ultimately outperforming his counterpart so thoroughly that even the rival family's own representatives privately admitted defeat before the judges formally announced it. With the competition decisively won, the Marquis estate secured full, unambiguous claim over Jinshan Island, including its valuable mineral resources, dramatically strengthening the household's financial position going forward and definitively closing the door on General Cao's territorial pressure strategy. The victory was documented and witnessed formally enough that no future political maneuvering could realistically challenge it without directly contesting an outcome decided through the Crown's own sanctioned process. General Cao, watching his entire elaborate scheme collapse over the span of just a few months through what should have been an easy, gradual political squeeze against an apparently weakened, scandal-plagued household, found himself forced into an uncomfortable reassessment. His son pressed him on what to do next, whether to continue searching for some new angle of attack. General Cao, after a long silence, finally admitted something his pride had been resisting for weeks. The fool everyone in the region had been mocking for years wasn't actually a fool at all, and continuing to underestimate him would only invite further humiliation. Rather than escalating further, General Cao made the calculated decision to formally withdraw his quiet campaign against the estate, recognizing that the political cost of continued failure was beginning to outweigh any potential benefit. He even, in a move that genuinely surprised everyone who'd been following the conflict, sent a formal letter of reconciliation to the Marquis, framing the entire affair as an unfortunate misunderstanding born from regional political anxiety rather than personal animosity. An obvious face-saving exit, but one the Marquis, ever pragmatic himself, chose to accept graciously rather than press the advantage further and risk creating a permanently bitter enemy. Our boy, observing this resolution unfold, found himself quietly satisfied. Not every conflict needed to end in total annihilation of the opposing side. Sometimes the better outcome was simply forcing a powerful enemy to recognize the cost of continued aggression exceeded any potential reward, encouraging a stable peace born from mutual respect for demonstrated strength, rather than one built on temporary intimidation that could easily reignite later. With the major external threats finally resolved, life at the Marquis estate settled into something resembling genuine peace for the first time since our boy's arrival. His relationship with Su Yan, which had started as a purely strategic arrangement built on mutual convenience, had gradually deepened into something neither of them had fully anticipated. The careful boundaries she'd established on their wedding night had softened naturally over months of shared challenges, mutual respect earned through repeated demonstrations of competence and loyalty, and the kind of quiet companionship that develops between two people who have genuinely come to rely on each other. One evening, sitting together on the estate's eastern terrace overlooking the now secured fields of Jinshan Island in the distance, Su Yan finally asked him directly something she'd apparently been turning over in her mind for a while. How had someone the entire region had dismissed as hopelessly foolish turned out to possess this much knowledge, this much strategic depth, seemingly out of nowhere? Our boy considered for a long moment how much of the truth to share. He couldn't exactly explain the reality of his situation, an entire previous existence in a different world entirely, a fatal explosion, a diagnostic visor fused somehow into his very perception. So he settled for a version close enough to true without inviting impossible questions. That after his near-death illness those many months ago, something in him had simply changed. His mind sharpened in ways he couldn't fully explain himself, and he'd simply chosen to make the most of whatever strange gift that recovery had given him. Su Yan studied him for a long moment, clearly sensing there was more to the story than he was sharing, but she didn't press further. Whatever the true explanation, she'd long since stopped needing one. The man sitting beside her had proven himself, repeatedly and decisively, exactly when it mattered most. That, she decided, was enough. He reached over and took her hand, an action that would have felt impossibly bold months earlier but now simply felt natural. She led him, watching the last light fade over the fields that were now, finally and securely, theirs. Whatever schemes the world still had waiting for them, and knowing their luck there would certainly be more, they'd face them the same way they'd faced everything so far. Together and with absolutely no shortage of audacity. And somewhere across the city, in a quiet, unremarkable accounting office now run by an honest clerk instead of a corrupt embezzler, the estate's books had never looked healthier. Somewhere in a modest gambling hall, now operating under significantly more ethical management thanks to a reformed hanbao, ordinary people were finally getting a fair shake at the tables. And somewhere in a busy publishing house, a runaway bestseller continued flying off the shelves, its author known throughout the region only by a playful pen name, its true identity, the supposed fool who turned out to be anything but known fully only to the people who actually mattered. The boy everyone once called Brick had built himself an empire out of nothing but a sharp mind, a second chance, and a complete refusal to ever let anyone underestimate him twice.